Since 2003, this is the Sports Source, East Tennessee's #1 sports talk show.
Presented by Pipe Wrench, and by Junk Be Gone, and by the Garza Law Firm.
With your host, John Pennington. The Sports Source starts now.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome into the Junk Be Gone studios for the Sports Source today. It's an open date Sunday. That doesn't mean that our show is any less packed. We're going to be covering a lot of stuff. We're going to be breaking down offense, defense, some statistics you haven't seen. We're going to be looking ahead to Texas A&M. Let's look back to Texas A&M yesterday in their game with Alabama. What did that tell us for next Saturday's action? We got all kinds of stuff coming up. And as we usually do in the open date, I try and bring in some different voices. So we got 3 guys you haven't heard since August, and they're going to be out here. Let me go ahead and show you exactly what we're doing today. First of all, who are the real Vols? From what we've seen so far, which game best exemplifies who we think this team is, and is that good enough to reach Atlanta? Next, as I said, A&M and Alabama takeaways. We're going to be talking Brew, Nico, good, bad surprises, team MVP so far. We're going to go inside the numbers on Tennessee's offense and defense and some line of scrimmage numbers that are impressive. Latest on Tennessee recruiting, keys for the Tennessee team the rest of the way. Basically our 3-step plan for UT success, and everybody has a different plan here. Vols versus Aggies predictions and your take on that very question. We're going to get your take on what happens between Tennessee and Texas A&M. This first segment of our show is brought to you by the Garza Law Firm. Nothing could be more stressful than needing an attorney, folks. Most of us don't understand the intricacies of the law, so when you need an attorney, you're having to trust, really trust, another human being with your life, your belongings, your future, your money. Marcos Garza and the Garza Law Firm can help relieve that stress. Their track record of success tells you why and how. They have been in East Tennessee for decades. They do a tremendous job. They even have one of their newest offices is up in Jacksboro. So anywhere in the East Tennessee area, if you're hearing this ad, you're seeing this ad, you can call the Garza Law Firm. Check them out, garzalaw.com, to learn more. We appreciate them for being a big part of the Sports Source. All right, let's welcome in our panelists for today. We have right here from WNML, Vince Farrar. From GoVols 24/7, we've got Ryan Callahan. Will West, also from 99.1, the sports animal, WNML. And right there, Bob Hodge back with us, longtime media member, longtime member of this panel. All right.
Good morning.
So we're going to be talking about what is the real Tennessee team that we've seen so far, which game is most likely to be the real UT team, and is that good enough to get to Atlanta? But first, let's put up the poll question. I want to get you involved. And the question is, how will Tennessee fare versus Texas A&M next week? And I'll give you 3 choices. Big win, tight win, loss. Right now, a few of you have already voted, the leader is loss. 45% say loss. But you've got 55% if you combine the wins. So that's the big win, tight win, loss. Chime in with your smartphone on that QR code. It'll take you right to our website where you can vote, or just go to sportsource.tv/polls and vote there. All right. As I said, I want to know what you guys are thinking about the Tennessee team so far. 4-1 start, not that far off from what we expected before the season. I would think most of us would have said 4-1 or 5-0 at this point, so you're right there. But when you look at the games you've seen, I don't think Austin Peay or UTSA are the most likely answers here, so let's whittle it down to 3. What do you think the most likely Tennessee, what do you think is closest to the real Tennessee team? The one we saw against Virginia? The one we saw against Florida, or the one we saw against South Carolina? I'll start with Vince. What do you think?
I would say South Carolina. Now, certainly there's elements you can pick from all the different games, how they handle the road environment. Maybe that's who they are on the road and versus at home, where there's some built-in advantages. But I would say South Carolina because it is closer to what we expected. We saw what Joe Milton and this offense could do in terms of scoring points when they actually had some help. And for the first time, you actually had the offensive line that we expected going into the season. So I would say South Carolina.
He says closest to South Carolina.
Yeah, I think South Carolina as well. I agree with him. And part of it is the offensive line. Gerald Mancilla tackle. Cooper Mays stepping in means you're better at 2 positions because you bump Ollie to guard. He's better than an injured Andre Carrick. So I think that's the biggest one. They also went tempo more in this game. This is a really simplistic offense. So when you don't go tempo, you really kind of handcuff yourself a little bit with what Josh Heupel does. So I think expect to see them be more like South Carolina, but other teams are going to have a better offensive line than South Carolina did.
What do you think?
This is going to sound like a cop-out, and it probably is. I think it's all of them because I think this is an inconsistent team. It's a team that's going to be reliant on the matchups that it plays, and more so than last year's team. I think last year's team was one that could impose its will on others.
Yeah.
I think this year's team is going to be totally reliant on who it's playing. If it's playing Alabama or Texas A&M, they're going to struggle to run the ball, and that's a totally different team. When you play a team like, say, Kentucky or someone like that, and you have a different game, you can run the ball better, that's a totally different team. So I think it's going to be more week to week, and that's why what we've seen so far is kind of leading to this question, which is the real team. It's all of them because they're not consistent.
You cavaliers the question. Although here's the thing, and you guys have heard me say this, you never see the same team twice. Lou Holtz said that years ago. Justin Hamilton, who was with us last year, said that. Coaches don't know how to get the same performance out of teams every single week. Yeah. So what you're saying is correct. Now ignore it and tell me which you think is closest.
The closest to the team that this should be, I think, is the South Carolina game. I do agree with that. Okay. Now, I think, though, I
think it's going to be up and down.
I think that's the ceiling for this team, and we're not going to see that all that often.
But I think the reason, and I'm not saying you're copping out, but the reason that is a cop-out answer, even though it's correct, is that's true for every team.
Yeah.
It's rare to see a team that brings the set like Georgia so far. Kentucky fans didn't expect to see that Georgia yesterday. You know, that was the best Georgia has looked.
Yeah.
And there are other games where team comes out, looks terrible. It's like, man, how did that happen? And then they come back Ole Miss against Alabama does nothing.
Yeah.
Ole Miss against LSU the next week explodes. It's like, okay, you're up and down every single week.
But last year, Tennessee was scoring 30-plus every week.
Against everybody.
Against everybody. Yep. This year, 16 against Florida, 30 against Austin Peay, and 41 against South Carolina. That's the same team to me.
All right, let's say that it's South Carolina. Okay, let's say that's the closest. If you're looking at just a ballpark, that's probably somewhere. You're not going to get that same performance every week, but it's somewhere around that range like South Carolina. Bob Hodge, is that good enough to get to Atlanta?
No, it's not. Because here's the reason. I think what you saw against South Carolina, Will said it. Man, that defense was great. And man, that South Carolina offensive line was horrible. So I think when you run into, you're going to see a better offensive line next week against Texas A&M. You're going to see a better offensive line Georgia, better offensive line Alabama, probably even a little better Kentucky. Yeah. So you're not going to get that every week. And I think when you look at South Carolina, the offense scored great. We're over 40 points. But you still saw the fits and the starts to where it wasn't a smooth machine like it looked like last year, where you would go a quarter and a half and there was just no slowing that offense down. Now, 2 good drives, 3 bad drives, pretty good drive, 2 bad drives. So I think that the South Carolina game is your answer. That's the team you are. But I don't think that team is going to be able to run the table from here.
Will, is it 10 seconds? Is it good enough to get to Atlanta?
Not even remotely, but I didn't expect them to get there before the season, so I don't know why that would be surprising to anyone.
Was that performance good enough to get into Atlanta?
No. Georgia showed yesterday they're the class of the SEC until further notice.
No. For them to overtake Georgia or have a chance, they had the same kind of offense as a year ago and have an improved defense. The defense is improved. Offense took a step back. It's not overall.
What we'll discuss a little bit later is can this offense improve? Now, well, we'll get into that when we get into that. Let me put up the Tennessee schedule so far. This is what we're talking about in terms of good enough for Atlanta. I'm putting this up because I forgot to put it up about 5 minutes ago when we started this conversation. So for those of you wondering, the rest of the schedule, you look when we're talking today about statistics, you know this, but you've played Virginia, Austin Peay, and Texas San Antonio. So the numbers are skewed. You're about to get to the meat of your schedule, with the exception of UConn and, well, Vanderbilt's a joke. But with the exception of those games, you're getting into the meat of your schedule. So therefore, when we're looking at these stats later on, ask yourself, and I will be asking it as well, as good as the defensive stats have looked, can they keep it up against a tougher slate? As bad as some of these offensive stats have looked, can they improve against a tougher slate? Those are the things we'll be looking at as we go through today's show. When we come back, Alabama rolled into College Station in Texas A&M yesterday and then rolled out with a victory. What did we learn from that game that we can apply to next week's game against the Volunteers? We'll discuss that next. Come on back on the Sports Source.